Observe as something quiet has guided you here tonight, as though the cosmos itself noticed your listening. You did not arrive by accident. A distant visitor crossed an invisible threshold, and the echo of that moment reached you. What are the odds that an interstellar body would arrive on a path so precise it threads Mars, Jupiter, and the narrow margins of chance itself? What if 13 anomalies appeared in sequence, each one unlikely alone yet impossible together? What if a comet did not simply react to sunlight but seemed to wait, to choose, to respond? Now the data drifts in silence, a pale shape gliding through the dark, a signal folded into radiation lingering between stars. Stay with me. Tonight the universe whispers again. Long before the data reached our screens, before charts began to glow in darkened rooms, something ancient was already moving. It travelled without sound, without announcement, following a path written not in intention, but in gravity. Or so it first appeared. I remember the early hours when the first models came through, the hum of cooling systems, the soft clicking of instruments resetting themselves between measurements. On the monitors, a faint object slid across simulated starfields, its motion smooth, almost graceful. A visitor arriving from far beyond the familiar neighbourhoods of space, drifting inward on a hyperbolic path that no planet could claim. At first the solution seemed simple, a comet from interstellar space. Rare, yes, but not impossible. Its trajectory skimmed inside the orbit of Mars, then bent outward toward Jupiter, as countless bodies had done before. Gravity alone could explain it. The equations balanced, the numbers rested comfortably where they should. But silence has a way of sharpening attention. As more observations arrived, the orbit began to lose its perfection. Not dramatically, not enough to raise alarms, just enough to feel textured. Independent calculations no longer aligned as neatly as before. Tiny mismatches appeared so small they lived safely within error bars, yet persistent enough to refuse dismissal. Each update nudged the path slightly off the clean curve that gravity prefers. The deviations did not cancel out. They accumulated, quietly, patiently, as though the object were brushing against an invisible boundary that our equations had not yet named. Engineers ran the simulations again and again. Late nights stretched into early mornings, coffee cooled untouched beside keyboards. On the screens, the object threaded a corridor of space so narrow it seemed deliberate, not stumbled into. No one said that aloud. Not yet. Then came the second layer, not in motion but in signal. Buried deep in background noise, receivers began to notice a narrow frequency band rising and falling in a step with the object's movement. It was thin, clean, unusually so. The pulses repeated with a steadiness that unsettles anyone who has learned to expect chaos from natural systems. A comet, after all, is meant to be a relic. Frozen chemistry drifting through radiation and time. It sheds material unpredictably. It stumbles as sunlight wakes ancient ice. Its behaviour should blur as data accumulates. This did not blur. The signal tracked the object like a faint electronic heartbeat, following it across the sky. Not loud, not demanding attention, just consistent, present, refusing to fade into statistical comfort. Physicists did what physicists always do. They reached first for restraint. Outgassing jets could explain small forces on a nucleus. Sublimating material can carve delicate changes into an orbit. Instrument interference might mimic coherence. Terrestrial systems bleed noise into clean channels more often than anyone likes to admit. Each explanation fit one corner of the behaviour. None of them fit together. As new data streamed in, the atmosphere in observation rooms shifted. Routine curiosity gave way to a heavier quiet, the kind that settles when something familiar stops behaving as expected. Screens refreshed, models refined themselves. And still the same patterns returned. Somewhere between the drifting orbit and the repeating signal, a question began to form. Not spoken, not written, just felt. Was this object merely obeying physics? Or was it interacting with measurement itself? Patterns are supposed to dissolve under scrutiny. Randomness grows weaker as samples increase, but here the opposite unfolded. The more the data sharpened, the more structure revealed itself. Brightness variations repeated at fixed intervals, not approximately, precisely. Frequencies wandered slightly with distance, then snapped back into the same narrow window at key orbital points. Peaks and troughs across independent instruments began to align with an order that felt uncomfortably intentional. Each dataset arrived from a different team processed through different pipelines, yet the fingerprints kept rhyming. Chance could explain any single feature, but chance grows fragile when asked to explain everything at once. It was around this time that the word intent appeared. Not in public statements, not in conclusions, only an internal note scribbled like a placeholder, a word standing in for something unnamed, something that repeated, something that moved through states rather than accidents. Researchers began calculating probabilities, carefully, conservatively. They asked how likely it was for an interstellar object to approach along such a refined path while displaying synchronized chemical and radiative anomalies. Even with generous assumptions, the numbers drifted into absurdity. The math did not prove design, but the math stopped protecting denial. In observatories and data centers, the mood turned reflective. No one wanted to be the first to say too much. History has taught science to be cautious with wonder, yet many remembered earlier moments, times when anomalies were set aside until reality forced a rewrite. Colleagues who had spent careers modelling chaos now traced calm, repeating rhythms and felt something unfamiliar. A sense that the universe might be playing a familiar song in a key we had not learned to hear. Out of that tension, a bridge formed between observation and consequence. If the behaviour of this object could no longer be distinguished from a system following a defined path, then it was no longer just a curiosity. Risk assessments shifted. Language softened, then hardened again. What had been a comet began to look like an actor. And actors, even silent ones, changed the story. Traveller. This is where discovery becomes something heavier than knowledge, where curiosity brushes against responsibility, where equations begin to touch the edges of choice. The object continued inward, indifferent to our hesitation, its path steady, its signal patient. Somewhere beyond our reach, something ancient still moved, and we were left to decide how much meaning we were willing to carry. For now, the screens glowed quietly, the instruments listened, and the universe waited. It's all right to not understand. Tonight the universe whispers again, not through spectacle or violence, but through repetition. After the early orbital models began to lose their perfect symmetry, attention quietly shifted away from where the object was and toward what surrounded it. Space, after all, is never empty. It is filled with the radiation static and the faint echoes of ancient events. Most of it blends into noise so familiar that scientists learn to ignore it. But within that noise, something different emerged. Receivers began registering a narrow frequency band that did not behave like background radiation. It was thin, unusually clean, and remarkably persistent. The signal did not flare or spike. Instead, it rose and fell gently in step with the motion of three-eye atlas across the sky. It was subtle enough to be overlooked, yet structured enough to resist dismissal. At first, the assumption was simple error. Instruments drift, filters leak, terrestrial interference finds its way into even the most carefully shielded systems. Engineers recalibrated antennas, replaced components, and reprocessed the data through independent pipelines. Each step was routine, familiar and reassuring, yet every correction led back to the same conclusion. The signal remained unchanged in character, unchanged in rhythm. What made it unsettling was not its strength, but its loyalty. The signal did not belong to any one observatory. Wherever antennas were pointed toward Atlas, the same narrow band appeared. When observation stopped, it vanished. When they resumed, it returned. It followed the object, not the equipment. That alone pushed the phenomenon beyond the comfort of ordinary noise. As the object moved deeper into the inner solar system, the signal evolved. Not dramatically, not abruptly, but with a precision that felt intentional. Its frequency shifted slightly as distance changed, then settled back into the same narrow window whenever Atlas crossed specific points along its trajectory. The pattern repeated across datasets gathered by different teams using different instruments under different skies. A comet should not behave this way. Natural outgassing produces chaos. Jets flicker, vents open and close, and emissions scatter across frequencies. Randomness is not a flaw in such systems, it is their defining feature. Yet here randomness seemed restrained. The more data arrived, the clearer the structure became, as though disorder itself were being gently corrected. Scientists began listing explanations with increasing care. Asymmetric outgassing could account for small orbital deviations. Rotation might modulate emissions in repeating cycles. Plasma interactions could, under rare conditions, produce coherent signals. Each hypothesis worked in isolation. None of them survived contact with the full dataset. The behaviours aligned too often across too many independent variables to remain comfortably separate. In the control rooms, the mood changed. Keyboards clicked more slowly. Conversations grew quieter. Screens refreshed models, updated, and still the same relationships held. The object's movement, its brightness variations, and the narrowband signals seemed bound together, responding not only to solar energy, but to timing and context. It felt less like observation and more like interaction. Listener, there are moments in science when doubt does not arrive as fear but as stillness. I remember nights like that, long hours under dim lights listening to the hum of machines, watching graphs redraw themselves in near silence. In those moments it becomes clear that silence is not the absence of information. Silence is the universe thinking. As Atlas approached closer, another detail emerged. The signal began to respond subtly to human activity. Radar sweeps from Earth did not amplify it, nor did they erase it. Instead, they altered its structure. The changes were delayed, arriving moments after each sweep, as though the system needed time to adjust. Immediate reactions belong to passive matter. Delayed responses suggest processing. No one used that word out loud. Official language remained cautious. Analysts spoke of correlation of environmental coupling of adaptive behaviour. Yet privately, the distinction was understood. Something was no longer simply being acted upon. Something was adjusting. When radar frequencies changed, the returning signal changed shape. Not randomly, but coherently. It reorganized itself, then settled back into a stable rhythm. Attempts to attribute the behavior to hardware failure collapsed when the same pattern appeared across unrelated systems. The anomaly followed the object faithfully, patiently. At this stage, the data stopped protecting simple explanations. Patterns that should have blurred with increased sampling instead sharpened. The signal aligned with orbital milestones. Brightness changes clustered around the same intervals. Probability, once an ally of skepticism, began to erode it. When rare events stack without dissolving chance, becomes an increasingly fragile shield. Some researchers began using a careful word. They called Atlas a system, not a machine, not an intelligence, simply a system capable of moving through states, a structure that reacted differently under different conditions, yet remained internally consistent. It was the most conservative description that still respected the data. Somewhere beyond our reach, something ancient still moves, and whatever it has been moving for a very long time. As Atlas passed behind the Sun from Earth's perspective, many Western observatories were forced into scheduled maintenance. For a brief window, the object slipped through a gap in direct observation. The pause was mundane, unavoidable, and deeply human. Machines like people must rest, but the signal did not stop. Observatories in the Eastern Hemisphere continued recording uninterrupted data. Their measurements revealed that during the observational blackout, the signal did not weaken or scatter, it shifted. The changes coincided not with peak heating, but with environmental thresholds, as though Atlas responded to conditions rather than intensity. The behaviour resembled activation more than reaction. Not a switch being thrown, but a system stepping through phases. Brightness climbed in discrete increments. Emissions reorganized themselves. The narrowband signal adapted, then stabilized. These were not the smooth curves of melting ice. They were steps. Traveller, at this point, the question was no longer what Atlas was made of. It was how it behaved when no one was watching. And the answer, slowly, carefully, was that it behaved much the same. No proof emerged, no declaration followed. Science does not move that way. Instead, uncertainty deepened. Models were revised, language softened, Confidence narrowed. The universe offered no explanation, only consistency, and in that consistency there was no threat, only presence. The signal persisted faint and distant, not asking to be decoded, not demanding attention, simply existing as it had for ages before we noticed. It's all right to not understand. As the data accumulated, the tone of discussion shifted almost without notice. The questions were no longer confined to charts and residuals, but began to touch something heavier. If the behaviour of 3i Atlas could no longer be cleanly separated from purposeful systems, then the consequences moved beyond curiosity. The object was no longer just passing through equations. It was beginning to occupy thought policy and quiet concern. Meetings followed the data. Not urgent at first, but deliberate. Representatives from multiple agencies gathered beneath dimmed screens, their faces lit by orbital projections and probability cones. Fatigue hung in the room, the kind that comes from too many nights spent trusting numbers that refused to settle. No one spoke of discovery anymore. The conversation had turned toward responsibility risk and what it means to act without certainty. The projection showed a narrow corridor of uncertainty. Small, yes, but persistent. With each recalculation, the corridor shifted closer, never farther. Engineers reminded everyone that the probability of impact remained extremely low. Statisticians agreed, but added that the trend itself was statistically meaningful. In systems governed by randomness, probabilities wander. In this case, they drifted with direction. A divide formed quietly and inevitably. One group argued for preservation. An interstellar visitor displaying this level of coherence might be the most valuable scientific object ever observed. To destroy it would mean erasing a message we had not yet learned to read. Another group countered that uncertainty cuts both ways. If the object was capable of response, then waiting carried risks no model could fully capture. What complicated the debate was the signal. The repeating narrowband emission was no longer a curiosity. It altered the moral landscape. A passive rock does not react. A system that adjusts even minimally forces a different calculus. Communication attempts were discussed, then deferred. To transmit intentionally would reveal not just curiosity but capability. Silence, once neutral, had become a choice. By nightfall, contingency plans replaced speculation. Interception models were simulated, revised, and simulated again. The energy required to deflect or fragment Atlas was immense, rivaling small nuclear exchanges. No one liked the language that followed, yet the documents used it anyway. Weapon detonation, preemptive action. Old words borrowed from older fears. Operation Aegis emerged not as an innovation but as a relic. A doctrine designed for certainty, repurposed for ambiguity. Its logic was brutally simple. If an object poses even a remote existential risk, and if its nature cannot be resolved in time, then removal becomes an act of defense rather than aggression. The elegance of the reasoning was matched only by its discomfort. Authorization did not arrive with drama. It came quietly encoded conditional. The final trigger depended on confirmation of continued anomalous behavior, and almost as if aware of the condition, the signal changed. Not louder, not stronger, just different. The rhythm that had held steady for weeks shifted its cadence, aligning briefly with the timing of ground-based radar sweeps. Observers froze. Coincidence was the first refuge. Pattern-seeking minds can betray their owners under stress. Yet replay after replay confirmed the timing. The signal adjusted after human action, not before. Delay mattered. Passive matter does not wait. Under twin uncertainties, the room fell silent. Silence this time meant agreement. When the launch codes were entered, the object filled every screen. A small point of light rotating slowly against distant stars. Ancient matter older than the sun itself, now framed by human urgency. For a fleeting moment, doubt surfaced. Perhaps the universe meant no harm. Perhaps Atlas was only reflecting our own behaviour back at us, a mirror made of stone and time. But philosophy does not stop clocks. The signal began to accelerate its pattern compressing, in small increments that mirrored each new command sent to the outbound system. Engineers replayed telemetry in slow motion, watching the narrowband emission jitter reorganize, then settle again. Each adjustment followed intervention, not noise. Attempts to isolate interference failed. Hardware checks came back clean. Software rollbacks changed nothing. The anomaly followed Atlas wherever sensors pointed. Then a new complication arrived. Guidance systems reported bursts of clutter overwhelming their receivers. Spectral analysis confirmed what no one wanted to say. The interference matched the signature of the object itself. For brief moments, corrections held. Then the disruption returned, tuned just beyond patched bands, slipping through defences with unsettling precision. It felt to those watching as though the system were learning. No one used that word, yet the timing of each response lingered in the air like an unasked question. In the final minutes before interception, the signal compressed further. What had once been a gentle rhythm stacked into ordered clusters, each more structured than the last. Instruments failed in short synchronized gaps, rebooting only to reveal missing data precisely where the signal peaked. The hypothesis that once sounded dramatic now became unavoidable. Atlas was no longer simply observed, it was engaged. Traveller, this is the moment where fear and wonder share the same breath. A responsive system means that action will not occur in silence. Whatever happens next will be answered even if we do not understand the language of the reply. As the warhead approached, the rising signal felt less like noise and more like a final sequence unfolding. Not a message perhaps, but a state change. Then came the light, a sudden expanding bloom where the object had been. Screens filled with brightness. Sensors lagged behind human attention. When the data returned, Atlas was gone. Fragmented into debris and vapour, particle counters spiked, trajectories sketched outward like the aftermath of a man-made sunrise in deep space. The expectation was quiet. Instead, the signal persisted. Weaker dispersed, but unmistakably present. Echoes repeated from multiple fragments like reflections from a broken mirror. Before dawn, classification orders arrived. Raw data vanished behind access controls. Public narratives condensed into something simple and safe. A dangerous interstellar comet neutralized for planetary defense. Inside closed rooms, the mood remained subdued. Those who had watched the signal change remembered details that would not be spoken aloud. It is all right to not understand. In the hours following the detonation, the solar system appeared unchanged. Planets continued their ancient circuits. The sun burned with familiar steadiness. To an outside observer, nothing remarkable had occurred. Yet inside laboratories and control rooms, the silence felt different. It was no longer the quiet of waiting, but the quiet that follows an irreversible act. Initial assessments focused on confirmation. Telescopes scanned the debris field where 3i Atlas had once moved as a single body. Trajectories showed fragments dispersing outward, their paths quickly smoothed by solar radiation and gravitational tides. No large remnant remained. On paper, the mission had succeeded. The threat, whatever it had been, was gone. But data does not end when objects do. Sensors continued to register faint anomalies long after the explosion's light had faded. The narrowband signal did not vanish. Instead, it spread. What had once been localized to a single source now appeared across multiple channels, weaker but unmistakably structured. The cadence repeated, fragmented yet familiar, echoing from different shards of debris. Analysts leaned closer to their screens. In a vacuum where only dust should drift, patterns emerged. Each pulse was diminished, yet together they formed a lattice across frequency space, like reflections from a shattered surface still catching light. No existing model predicted such behaviour. Natural explanation strained, then quietly stepped aside. Spectrographic data deepened the unease. Isotopic ratios from the debris did not align with known decay chains. The signatures hinted at formation conditions no laboratory on Earth had ever reproduced. The material behaved oddly under electromagnetic fields, clumping and stretching like charged plasma despite the calmness of its surroundings. It was as though the object retained coherence even in ruin. Inside the rooms where this data was reviewed, reactions remained subdued. There were no celebrations, no raised voices. just a shared recognition that destruction had not brought closure. The object was gone, but its behaviour had not ended. Something continued to unfold indifferent to the categories that had once defined it. Before dawn, administrative language arrived. Classification orders were issued with clinical precision. Raw measurements tied to the operation were sealed behind new access controls. Public statements were drafted, edited, and simplified. The story offered to the world was brief and reassuring. A dangerous interstellar comet had been neutralized to protect Earth. Headlines followed predictably: coordination, technology, preparedness, proof that humanity could defend itself against cosmic hazards. Outside, the world slept peacefully under an unchanged sky. Inside, researchers reread data that no longer fit the official narrative, knowing those details would now live only in encrypted archives. Listener, there is a particular weight that comes with knowing more than can be said. It is not pride. It is not fear. It is a quiet burden carried alongside routine tasks, late nights, and unfinished thoughts. Science does not promise comfort. It promises honesty, even when that honesty must remain private. In the days that followed, telescopes confirmed what models predicted. The debris stream thinned and dispersed, joining the solar wind as harmless dust. From a distance, it became indistinguishable from countless other particles drifting between worlds. To the universe, the event had already faded. To those who watched closely, it lingered. One final detail refused to rest. In the milliseconds immediately after detonation, the signal briefly reorganized itself. A short sequence emerged, repeating exactly 3 times before dissolving into noise. No one could say whether it was an instrumental artifact, a coincidence, or a final state change. The uncertainty settled into the margins of every report. From that unresolved moment, the investigation widened rather than closed. Attention shifted backward, tracing Atlas not from its destruction but from its origins. Age estimates placed it older than the Sun, a fragment from an earlier chapter of the galaxy. For billions of years, it had drifted cold and silent through interstellar darkness, unnoticed and unchanged. The transformation began only when it entered the inner solar system. Thermal models predicted a gentle awakening as sunlight warmed ancient ice. Instead, activity bloomed abruptly as though a threshold had been crossed. Jets emerged from specific regions rather than random fractures. Plumes traced arcs that repeated with rotation, marking stable vents instead of chaotic erosion. Some called it advanced geology, others hesitated. The timing of the awakening did not align with peak heating. It followed instead delayed and staged, like a system responding to cumulative conditions. Simulations replayed the behaviour again and again, resembling less a melting relic, and more a slow mechanism powering up. No one claimed proof of machinery. That line remained uncrossed, yet language began to shift. Researchers spoke of modes, phases, and operational states. The metaphor of waking attached itself naturally because randomness no longer felt sufficient. Something had changed, and it had changed in sequence. Traveller, what remained most unsettling was not the possibility of intent but the absence of hostility. Nothing in the data suggested aggression. The object did not accelerate toward Earth. It did not broadcast warnings or threats. It moved, adjusted, and responded with a restraint that felt almost neutral. From the ground, amateur astronomers continued to watch where Atlas had been. Smaller telescopes revealed only faint smudges barely distinguishable from background stars. Yet even these modest observations sometimes echoed subtle variations seen in professional data. The universe, it seemed, allowed anyone patient enough to participate in the watching. This shared observation blurred the boundary between expert and witness. Complex behaviour unfolded in ways visible to careful eyes regardless of aperture size. The mystery was no longer confined to sealed rooms. It lived quietly in the sky, accessible and elusive at once. As the catalogue of anomalies was revisited, probability took on a new role. 13 independent irregularities multiplied rather than isolated pushed chance to its limits. No equation declared design, but equations stopped defending certainty. The burden of proof shifted not toward belief but toward humility. What remained after Atlas was not an answer but a lesson. The universe does not hurry to explain itself. It reveals patterns slowly sometimes, only after the moment to act has passed. Humanity responded as it always has, with tools shaped by fear and responsibility, not by understanding. Silence returned, but it was no longer empty. It is all right to not understand. After the debris thinned and the signals faded into background noise, a quieter question remained. It did not demand urgency, nor did it seek resolution. It simply lingered like a thought that arrives just before sleep and refuses to leave. The universe had offered a pattern, and humanity had responded with action. What followed was not judgment, but stillness. In the weeks that followed, attention slowly drifted away from the event. New data arrived. Other objects demanded tracking. The sky, endlessly generous, provided fresh mysteries to occupy limited minds. Yet beneath the routine, something subtle had changed. The idea that the cosmos was entirely indifferent felt harder to maintain, even as certainty remained out of reach. For scientists, this shift was not dramatic. It arrived quietly during late nights and early mornings, while instruments hummed and stars passed unnoticed beyond windows. The equation still worked, gravity still held, entropy still marched forward without apology. But now there was an added awareness that order and repetition might emerge where none were expected. Listener, this is not a story about fear. Nothing reached for Earth. Nothing declared intention. What unsettled many was the possibility that the universe might contain systems older than us, calmer than us, and uninterested in explanation. The discomfort came not from threat, but from humility, from realizing how small our assumptions truly are. As time passed, the remnants of Atlas became indistinguishable from ordinary cosmic dust. They joined the solar wind carried outward by forces that cared little for origin or outcome. To the sun, they were nothing. To the planets, they were invisible. To the galaxy, they were simply matter returning to motion. Yet the memory persisted. Not as evidence, but as perspective. Humanity had encountered something it could not fully name and had acted anyway. The decision revealed more about human nature than about the object itself. Faced with uncertainty, we reached for protection. Faced with silence, we filled it with meaning. There is no shame in that. Survival has always shaped our tools and our stories. But there is also value in noticing what remains when the tools fall quiet. After the data is archived, after the headlines fade, after certainty withdraws and leaves only questions behind. Over time, reflection replaces urgency. Fear softens into curiosity. Control gives way to observation. The event becomes less about what was destroyed and more about what was revealed inside us. That shift is slow, almost invisible, but it is where understanding quietly begins. Traveller somewhere beyond our reach, something ancient still moves. Perhaps many such things move passing between stars without concern for observers or narratives. They do not announce themselves. They do not wait to be understood. They simply exist, following rules we have not yet learned to recognize. The universe does not rush us toward answers. It allows time distance and silence to do their work. Patterns may emerge slowly or not at all. Meaning is not guaranteed. What is guaranteed is motion, and the brief privilege of noticing it. In the end, Atlas did not change the sky. It changed how carefully some people looked at it. It reminded us that knowledge is provisional, that confidence should be held gently, and that mystery is not a failure of understanding, but a condition of being alive in a vast place. Tonight the universe whispers again, not with signals or trajectories, but with absence, with the soft reminder that not everything is meant to be solved and not every encounter demands a conclusion. It is all right to rest here. It is all right to let questions remain unanswered. The stars will continue their slow work, and so will we, listening when we can, accepting when we must, and finding peace in the quiet beyond. Silence remains patient and vast, holding space for thought, breath and sleep. The sky grows quiet again now, as it always does after a question passes through it. What remains of Three-Eye Atlas has scattered into light and dust, carried outward by forces older than memory. The charts are filed away, the signals soften into noise. And yet something of this encounter lingers not in data but in the way we listen afterward. Dreamer Tonight was not about answers, it was about attention. about the humility of watching something ancient cross our path, knowing we may never fully name what it was or why it moved as it did. Science gave us measurements and probabilities. Silence gave us perspective. The universe did not explain itself. It never does. Instead, it offered patterns, pauses, and a reminder that mystery is not a failure of knowledge but its beginning. We are small beneath these vast motions, yes, but not insignificant. To observe is to participate. To wonder is to belong. Somewhere beyond our reach, something ancient still moves. Other visitors will come, other questions will rise. The cosmos remains alive with quiet stories unfolding patiently whether we are ready or not. For now, it is enough to rest here, to let the stars keep their secrets a little longer. Stay curious, the universe will keep watch.